One of the clips indicating the latter was the painful ending of an attempted ski jump. The skier appeared to be in good form, and then you can't even figure out why. Suddenly he just goes tumbling over the side. And he bounces off the supporting structure. Now, that certainly looks like failure and defeat, but it turns out he intended to fall, not just in the way that people say, no, I really meant it that way, but he said later that the jump surface had gotten so fast that midway down the ramp, he realized that if he completed the jump, he was going to end up going beyond the safe zone, and very well, it could have killed him. And so he said, I'll go off the side, I'll take a tumble this way, which is exactly what he did. And while I'm sure he didn't get any points, he suffered no more than a headache from the tumble. In a very real sense, he was afraid of that slope. But that was not dumb or bad, right? He was afraid in a good way, and it saved his life. If he'd been somebody who said, no, I can do it, that could have ended quite badly. While fear is not a pleasant feeling, it's not always a bad feeling or a bad thing to feel, in the sense that it can lead us to make right decisions. Decisions that lead us towards life. Decisions that lead us towards godliness. The fear of the Lord will likewise turn us from the snares of death, as someone has said. Look at Proverbs 3:7, which I think is 2 down. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. So, the opposite of being wise in your own eyes, being a smart aleck, right, is to fear the Lord and to shun evil. I shouldn't even, okay. I'm just going to keep going. One of my favorite verses on this subject isn't in Proverbs, but it's actually in Exodus 20, verse 20. And this is the Ten Commandments passage. Moses has just come down with the tablets, and there's fire and smoke, and the mountain is shaking, and an unseen trumpet was blaring as the people are gathered around the mountain, and they are scared to death of what's going on. And Moses, verse 20 says, Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. God has come to test you so that the fear of the Lord will be with you, to keep you from sinning. So he says, don't be afraid. Be afraid. Don't be afraid. The fear of the Lord's good for you. But what was happening, right, was that they recognized the power of God as they saw this incredible sight before them. And as they sense God's power, they realize that He is more powerful than all the things that they have been afraid of up till now. Right? They had been slaves. They had been hunted down by Pharaoh when they left. And so the guy that they had been most afraid of was Pharaoh. They had been afraid of people. They had been afraid of what could happen to them. And so as scary as it was to see the power of God, it also made them recognize, wait a minute, this guy, Pharaoh can't do that, right? So if this guy's on my side, I can trust him. Well, maybe that trust wasn't the first thing that came out, but he's stronger than anybody else. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But it's good to be afraid of the right things, right? So, all right, we have a bunch of verses. We'll keep going. So he doesn't want them to be afraid in the sense of not approaching God. He wants them to be afraid in the sense of not rushing to sin, right? The fear of the Lord, the purpose of the fear of the Lord is to keep you from sinning, not to keep you away from God. Okay, let's keep going. Proverbs 28, verse 14. Blessed is the one who always trembles before God, but whoever hardens their heart falls into trouble. Again, looking at this parallelism kind of helps us understand. Trembling before God is recognizing his power and authority, like the Israelites were doing in that situation, right? And so they were blessed by seeing God's power. The opposite of trembling before God is hardening your heart to God. And there again, the Exodus story, as I went through this, I kept thinking of the story of the Exodus. There were so many things that tied into that. Because biblically, the person I think of the most when I think of somebody hardening their heart is Pharaoh, right? And all the plagues, it said he hardened his heart, he hardened his heart, he hardened his heart. And then some people are upset that it says, and it is, then you read the Lord hardened his heart. But that really is a natural consequence of when you harden your heart and you harden it and you harden it. The punishment for hardening your heart is that your heart gets harder. And it continues to get harder as you continue to reject him. It's not that people can never return to the Lord or that the Lord wouldn't accept them. But the harder they become inside, the less likely they are to turn. And that's always, to me, the frightening thing for people. Okay. Like I say, some things are reasonable to be afraid of. Every time there's a terrible storm, right? There's always somebody who's got to, go to the ocean, right, and watch it. I don't want to watch it and then have somebody else risk their life to pull you off, or they say, I can get through that. That's not really flooded. I got a truck. I can get through this. And then they're pulling them out with a winch, where. There are some things that are good to be afraid of because it makes us smarter, right? It causes us to do wise things instead of foolish ones. But often we're afraid of the wrong things. Many of us struggle with being people pleasers. It is a struggle that I have myself. And if I thought it was just my struggle, I wouldn't talk about it, but I know I'm not alone. I won't name any names, but a lot of us struggle with that. And what is that really but being afraid of what other people think, right? What are they going to think? What'll they say? And I think if we all wrote down every stupid thing we did because we were afraid what somebody would think, we could probably fill this hall, right? Something we didn't really want to do or kind of nervous about doing, but we thought, my friends will think I'm a dork if I don't do it. Or, I think it is especially hard as teenagers, that peer pressure. But if we're honest, turning 20 doesn't end that problem. And even turning 30 or 40 or a lot older years, we can still struggle with that. What are they going to think of me? What will people say? Or so-and-so will get upset. And that's such a killer line in churches, in every church I've been in. We often talk about the importance of vision and mission and, putting a great vision statement up there. But I've never seen a banner that might be pretty accurate that says, trying to keep everyone happy since 1855. And yet, how often is that really what we're going for? Proverbs 29:25 says, fear of man, and that's, fear of people, will prove to be a snare. But whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. And I think it's easy to paraphrase that to people-pleasing is a snare. And it is. We can go down so many not good roads because somebody, and very often it can be the least emotionally healthy person, who we can't upset them. Well, is that what you hear the Lord saying, or is that just you don't want anybody upset? And it's tough because I don't like upsetting anybody either. But sometimes there's a choice to be made, and I'm not talking about not being kind to people. I'm not talking about not being loving to people, but not always bowing to somebody's moods or a group's moods. And again, and I didn't write down the reference here. I think I have a verse from Exodus there. 14:31. When the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. Again, they were so afraid of Pharaoh. They were so afraid of the Egyptians. They had lived their lives, and their parents and grandparents had lived their lives as slaves, totally under the oppression of Pharaoh and the Egyptians. And now they realize, no, God is so much mightier. And so they feared the Lord and put their trust in him. Those two things sound the exact opposite and are the same. They feared him, meaning they recognized the awesomeness of his power and that he loved them and was looking out for them. Right? Sometimes we see somebody do something or trying to think of a specific instance, but somebody will say, boy, I'm glad he's on our side. Right? Glad he's on our side. And that's kind of what's going on here. They saw the power of the Lord and they thought, glad he's on our side, or we're on his side. So when they feared God, they actually put their trust in him. I read this little imaginary conversation that written by Dr. Henry Cloud, and it's an imaginary talk with God about people pleasing. And I had to fill in a name, and so I'm using John. There's no Johns, right? It was like I always try to do a name that nobody. Okay. So sorry if there's any Johns out there. So he said, think about this the next time you feel pressure to please someone or to please a group of people rather than trying to fear and please God. Picture yourself at your life review with God having the following conversation. So, why didn't you take the opportunity I offered you? I really wanted to, and I know it was your will for my life, but you know how upset John would have gotten if I did. It would have been awful. And God says, you're right. John would have gone through the roof and would have been upset with you. And I have a meeting with John later in exactly 3 years, 2 months, 6 days, 7 hours, and 33 minutes. At that time, I'll be talking to John about his tendency to get mad at people when they did not please him. I will take care of that issue. But that is John's life, not yours. You are responsible for your own decisions, your own choices. And John is responsible for how he responded to you. That will be his problem. But the fact that you chose to give in to him is your problem. And now I want to show you the life you gave up by living the life that other people wanted. And then he shows the TV, the film. I want to show you the life you gave up by living the life that other people wanted. I'm afraid of that. I'm afraid of that conversation. I'm not always good at living it out by being more afraid of that conversation than I am afraid of John or whoever else has an opinion. But being afraid of hearing that from the Lord. That breaks my heart, right? That freaks me out a little bit. And so I want to be the person who says lovingly, yeah, I know you don't like this, but, I have a sense this is really what God is wanting us to do. That's hard. That's really hard. But it is not the opposite of love, right? It is actually more loving to step forward and do what God asks than it is to try to make everybody else happy. Oswald Chambers said, the remarkable thing about fearing God is that when you fear God, you fear nothing else. And that's the thing about fearing God. You don't have to fear people. You don't have to fear the future. You can trust in God and not fear all the other things that you fear. When you fear God, you fear nothing else, whereas if you do not fear God, you fear everything else. And I'm afraid I'm too familiar with that reality. There were a number of verses and passages that demonstrated the upside, the joy and the glory of the fear of the Lord. I just have a couple here. Proverbs 15:33. Wisdom's instruction is to fear the Lord, and with humility comes before honor. So, as we fear the Lord, that is, we obey Him, we follow Him. That's humility. Before we are going to be put in a place of honor, it requires us to recognize, as Chevy Chase used to say, He's God and I'm not. Recognize that God is the ruler over us, the ruler over the whole earth. And when we find ourselves in that right relationship with Him, it's not a groveling relationship. God raises us up. He's made us a little lower than the angels. The place that we choose when we don't fear Him is way lower than the angels. Right? And chapter 22, verse 4, humility is the fear of the Lord. Its wages are riches and honor and life. Now, they may not always be in bankable form, the wages and the riches, but sometimes, He honors us with, I know that I'm so grateful for, I feel like I have so much. I look around at so many people who, they're not living in houses and they're not having running water and they're not having the things that I have. And I feel that God has given me even earthly wages and riches, but all the more in eternity and other things that are more important than earthly riches. Humility is the fear of the Lord. Its wages and riches, its wages are riches and honor and life. John Piper invents this little story that I thought was kind of cool. He said, suppose you were exploring an unknown Greenland glacier in the dead of winter. Just as you reach the sheer cliff with a spectacular view of miles of jagged ice and mountains of snow, a terrible storm breaks in. The wind is so strong that the fear rises in your heart that it might blow you over the cliff. But in the midst of the storm, You discover a cleft in the ice where you can hide, and here you feel secure. But even though secure, the awesome might of the storm rages on, and you watch it with a kind of trembling, fearful, but pleasurable as it surges out across the distant glaciers. Not everything we call fear vanishes from your heart, only the life-threatening part. And there remains that kind of trembling of awe and wonder. The feeling that you would never want to tangle with a storm or be the adversary of such a power. And so it is with God. The fear of God is what is left of the storm when you have a safe place to watch right in the middle of it. Seeing the power, but knowing the safety. And there are places in Scripture that talk about the cleft, hiding in the cleft of the rock, of God's being our cleft and our rock, our safe place. And he says, hope turns fear into a trembling and peaceful wonder. And fear takes everything trivial out of hope and makes it earnest and profound. The terrors of God make the pleasures of his people intense. The fireside fellowship is all the sweeter when the storm is howling outside the cottage. And I just love that picture of something that is awesome, fearful, and yet we have a safety in it. That power that comes from, it's not an abstract power, God's not a higher power, but a being. But when we say we fear him, we mean we recognize his amazing power. We know that if we know him, if we keep ourselves on his side, we don't have to fear anything else. Yes, we can trust in him because he is greater than anything else that we're afraid of. Right? I just wanted to share one where there were several stories that I found that I was like, oh, this is great. This is great. But if you've never seen the Shrek movies, or I think I've seen one or maybe two, but I love Shrek. The computer-generated ogre, his ever-noisy companion with him is voiced by Eddie Murphy. And in the first movie, they're attempting to rescue the Princess Fiona. And on the way, Shrek and Donkey come to a rickety wooden bridge spanning a moat of fiery lava. There's no way to reach the castle except to cross that bridge. And Donkey is absolutely terrified. As they approach the bridge, Shrek says, "You can't," I'm tempted to do a Scottish accent, but I'll probably, Shrek looks at him and says, "You can't tell me you're afraid